What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Underground Genius. My name is Kyle S. So a couple of things. First and foremost, I'm happy to say that this podcast can be found wherever you consume podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, Himalaya, etc., etc., etc. There is a place that you can't find this on that you normally listen to podcasts to. Definitely reach out to me and I definitely make sure that I get there as soon as possible. And of course, you can always reach out to me. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what you like. If you like the visuals, if you like the audio, if you don't like the audio, if you don't like the visuals, anything. I'm always welcoming feedback, things of that nature. So let's just, I know there was a little bit of delay to get into this episode, and I want to apologize for that. But for the going into the future, this the release should be consistent. So once again, every Sunday at 7 a.m. Eastern time will be the audio, and then the following day will be the video on YouTube. So wherever you're listening to this, or if you're watching this on YouTube, I would appreciate it if you like, subscribe, leave a good rating, and of course let me know how I'm doing. All right, so let's just jump into today's topic. So the act of collaboration in any medium is always something that warrants attention. Think of all of the collaborations that are out right now. And of course, Travis Scott is probably the first person that comes to mind. Not only is he collaborating with a bunch of musicians, but then he himself, using his Cactus Jack brand, is also collabing with a bunch of different companies in several different industries, whether it's McDonald's with his own meal, or Sony as a creative strategist, or whatever the title he was given. So the why, as far as collaboration in all of these different industries, they may not necessarily be the same, but the result is that there's conversation that's being generated around these companies and around these brands. So at the genesis of pretty much every major movement / cultural wave in hip hop is a group. You know, you think of NWA with gangster rap. You think of them Franchise Boys and D4L with Snap Music. Or you think of Ja Rule and Irv Gotti with Murder Inc., G Unit, Dipset, the run that Cash Money and Young Money went on. The list goes on. When you pile all of those things and other things together, it's obvious that hip hop is a very collaborative genre, even though it's not always necessarily painted out to be that much. And of course, seeing all of the parts of the machine work in tandem, it makes the product that much more enjoyable. And that goes for pretty much everything. So I was thinking about this as I was listening to a certain group, and I thought, damn, like what would their legacy have been if they had released just even one commercial project, like just one album out? And then I started to think about all of the groups that have a similar legacy. You know, these posses or these cliques or these collectives with large impacts, but they have no album or no project that one can immediately access right now. So with all of that being said, this episode is going to be the first part of a 2-part series where I explore popular hip-hop groups without a project. Now, the criteria for this list is very, very straightforward. So it's 2 things. I pretty much picked all the groups between 1989 and now. And more importantly, when I say a group that has no album out, I'm talking about no body of work that I can easily stream or access on one of the major DSPs, one of the major streaming platforms, whether it's Tidal, Apple Music, Spotify, or whatever. And the only reason why I made sure to filter out all of those projects, or filter in all of those projects rather, is because that's the way music is, more or less, that's the major way it's consumed right now. If I'm about to put somebody onto a song, or like let's say anybody is trying to share a song with somebody, more often than not, the first thing that they're going to do is find the streaming service link and share it. So for this first part, I'm gonna go in chronological order, but I'm gonna immediately break that rule just because even when I mention group without an album, there's probably one or two groups that come to mind immediately. So I just want to get them out of the way and kind of use that to format this episode and my approach to exploring all of these groups. So the first group I'm going to talk about is none other than Black Hippie. Of course, we're all familiar with Black Hippie, comprised of Absol, JRock, Kendrick Lamar, and Schoolboy Q, all signed to the boutique independent label TDE, and they formed in around the late 2000s. So even to step back a little bit, just within the context of hip hop, within the context of any industry, any genre, any platform, any medium, anything like that, what is the purpose? And I'm pretty sure this is the question that always gets asked in the beginning. What is the purpose of forming this group, of forming this bond, of forming something where it's a collaboration between multiple people? So even though they're all signed individually to TDE, they're not signed as a group. Black Hippie isn't signed as a group to TDE, so there's no contractual obligations that they need to fulfill as far as album requirements are concerned, or there's no touring, or there's nothing. So that gives them a lot of freedom when it comes to creation. Now, Schoolboy Q takes credit for the formation of the group. So this is from a 2012 Fader cover story. He says, quote, "Black Hippie was actually my idea because I was slacking in my music." He added, "I figured if I could be in a group, I could just write one verse and I could be good." I'm getting flashes of like group assignments back in college. Like I was the type of person, I don't know about you, but I was the type of person, if I was assigned a group project and if the group consisted of people I didn't know, I would just do it myself because I didn't want to leave my grade in the hands of somebody else. I trusted myself more than I trusted others, which may or may not be a good trait, but it is what it is. So moving on, each one of those artists in Black Hippie, they felt it was important to establish themselves as solo artists first, then as a group. And then the collaboration would come naturally after that. And one thing that's important to realize about Black Hippie is they don't always collaborate with each other or feature on each member's respective solo project. And I feel like this makes the group's songs feel more important. So whenever they do have an outing, it kind of feels like, oh, this is a moment. Maybe I should pay attention. So think JRock's Vice City, or the song Say What's Up, or the Swimming Pools remix that was featured on the deluxe version of, which one was that? Good Kid, Mad City. Or think of the Black Lip Bastard remix, which was featured on Control System, if I'm not mistaken, the Absol project. So as far as Kendrick Lamar, his thoughts on the group dynamics, and this was via a Complex article I picked up. He said, quote, "We feel when a group come together from the jump, it's always a stigma where they eventually break up. And that's because later down the line, everybody has their own creative differences." He went on to say, "What we did was start off with our own creative space and let each person in the group know what it is, know what we're working with and be familiar with it, then bring it together." And that's important because it helps us understand a little bit of the group's creative process. And that also may be the reason why there's a large emphasis placed on solo projects as opposed to a group project as a whole. Like the collaborations will come whenever they see fit, whenever it fit the larger context of a member's album. And if there is an opportunity down the line for them to release a project, that's when they'll pursue that. So you take a group filled with stars like Black Hippie. Obviously, one of the biggest impedances to a project would be time, like the scheduling conflict. Everybody has their own respective agenda, and finding a time to actually sit down as a group and decide, hey, listen, this is what we're going to do. I can understand how that'd be difficult. So, of course, it's obvious that the focus is on the highest quality art and the songs and albums that are produced to make sure that they have cohesion and work part of an overlay, and they're conceptually sound from start to finish. That's basically the focus of Black Hippie, and I would even go as far as to say that's the focus of TDE as a label. So I asked the question before, why do groups come together? Why is it that, why do people pursue the formation of a group? So let me take that a step further. Why is it that groups come together to make albums? So, and I don't want to say this to say that this is what Black Hippie was doing, but sometimes groups are used as launch pads for a single member's success outside of the group. And that's not by design. It's more or less how it's portrayed in the media. For example, publications would single out the most popular member of a group to increase appeal to drive traffic, because, the most important thing is to get as many clicks, to get as many eyes looking at the content as possible. And that would come in the form of big letters for one name and small letters for the rest of the names. Or like, take what happened with the XXL's, their October 2013 magazine cover. It read TDE, Rap's Illest Crew with Kendrick Lamar and Black Hippie. Now, obviously, if I was in Black Hippie, I feel a type of way about that, just because of the fact that, he's also in Black Hippie. It's not that the name of the group isn't Kendrick Lamar and Black Hippie, it's just Black Hippie. And of course, Solo, Ab-Soul, he tweeted after observing this occurring, I'm pretty sure multiple times, he tweeted, quote, "If y'all keep printing Kendrick Lamar and Black Hippie, I will remove myself from the group. Thanks." Groovy Q, he went on MTV News shortly after that, and he kind of echoed the same sentiment, saying, quote, "That's so disrespectful. We didn't go into that shoot saying this is Kendrick with Black Hippie. We went in there and said this is a Black Hippie shoot, so we expect a Black Hippie shoot," end quote. So for those of you who are familiar with Black Hippie, like super familiar with Black Hippie's journey and follow them over the years, you probably thought about the one time that they released a mixtape. It was a self-titled mixtape that came out in 2011. And the reason why I don't want to count that is, in addition to the fact that it was a mixtape, it featured 11 songs, 6 of which appeared on each of the members' earlier works. So rather than being a traditional commercial project, I kind of count this as a compilation of records that they just presented to fans like, yo, here you go. And of course, over the years, time allowed Black Hippie to record these songs and present it as a compilation, presented as one singular package. Yeah. Right now, Black Hippie kind of epitomizes what a supergroup would be referred to, especially now in 2020. They all established their own respective, unique fan bases. So like, you could go to an Ab-Soul show and the fans at that show, they may differ slightly from the fans at a Schoolboy Q show, who might differ from the fans at a Kendrick show. But then at the same time, they're able to come together and kind of feed off of each other's, not only their chemistry, but they're also able to feed off of their respective fan bases, which is dope. And as I mentioned before with the scheduling conflict, in addition to music, I'm pretty sure they're all pursuing a lot of different things, which of course creates these schedule conflicts. There are other ventures that they may want to pursue outside of music. So, and this is Schoolboy Q, he said in 2016, quote, "It's just hard for us all to be in the same room because we're all busy now. I'm pretty sure a Posse cut, but a Black Hippie album, I don't know. I can't say that. Posse cut for sure. That's easy. One song, but a whole album, that's hard. And I can definitely understand that. I definitely understand how getting all of them in the same room on the same accord, deciding to do the same to do one project, it could be difficult, especially considering the fact that maybe one of the group members' minds is on something else completely different, and the way they operate is unless they're unless they're putting their best foot forward, unless 100% of their time and energy is going into something, they'd rather not pursue it. So as far as JRock and what he has to think about this, he said, and I got this from Hip Hop DX. He said, "quote When I do round everybody up, I'd have that album done in like 2 days." So obviously he would be excited, as I'm pretty sure the rest of the group would be excited to get all of them in the studio to record one Black Hippie album. You know, and one of the issues aside from Black Hippie is just TDE's release schedule. It's there, even their current infrastructure. It's just there's so many different questions to ask. You know, and they started off as a label that gained recognition for hand-picked curation of the roster, and they developed the artists, whether it's media training, whether it's rollouts for the albums, whether it's all of these things. They spent a lot of time, money, and resources developing each of these artists. So that's something to definitely take note of. But over the years, we've seen the label's dynamics change. So in 2019, Dave Free departed from the label. He served as a president, but he started to focus on the handling of Baby Keem. And of course, SZA and her public spat with the label. Of course, it could be a thing of creative differences or release, getting a release date for our album or whatever it is. But it's just a very peculiar release schedule, and that creates an incongruous public reception for certain artists. You know, and that kind of leads to like this juxtaposition of the good artists or the good acts. And what I mean by that is, you know, we see Kendrick Lamar going by Pulitzer Kenny because he won that Pulitzer Prize, or JRock winning a Grammy. SZA, of course, being a critical darling, and she can't do any wrong. All of her releases are critical successes. And then a not so good. And by that I mean Absol's 2016 project, if we're talking numbers, selling less than 10,000 units its first week, and the non-existent career of Lance Skywalker, or Isaiah Rashad releasing an album back when I was still in college, you know, almost like 4 years ago at this point. So once again, I want to pose one more question. What is the purpose or function of a group? Is it to boost specific member or member stocks, to branch out into other industries or to other platforms? That's also something that is taken into consideration when forming a group, but then also when analyzing it and chronicling it and just looking back on a group. So I kind of wanted to use Black Hippie just as the framework for this conversation, or this monologue rather, for the groups to follow. I'm hoping that even though it's not possible for all of these groups that I'm going to mention to release a project, I'm hoping that some of them, Black Hippie included, do end up releasing something on streaming services, because I feel like all of these names, they're to be appreciated and celebrated and acknowledged as greats in their field. All right, so that does it for Black Hippie. So Let's travel back. Let's travel way, way, way back to the late 80s. So the next group is going to be the Native Tongues. By far the largest group on this list. Like I said, made in the late 80s. And the original group was comprised of De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Queen Latifah, Moni Love, and the Jungle Brothers. But then they also associated with several other individuals and entities, including the leaders of the New School, which was Busta Rhymes' old group, and much, much more. And as you can tell, if you're familiar with any of the groups that I just mentioned, a majority of these groups were from New York or the tri-state area. You know, shout out to Queen Latifah repping Jersey. So the name Native Tongues actually came from Q-Tip of Tribe Called Quest. One day he was chilling, cutting records, and he was cutting samples, and he stumbled across the New Birth, which is a funk band. Stumbled across one of their records, and the lead vocalist sang something to the effect of, "Took away our native tongues." And he liked it, and he ran with it. And rather than shout each individual out or each group out, because all of the aforementioned groups at that time, they collaborated, and in the years to follow, they collaborated with each other multiple times. So rather than shouting out each group every single time, they just decided it was easier to fall under the same umbrella known as the Native Tongues. So they made their mainstream debut on the 1989 De La Soul record, Buddy. So it featured the Jungle Brothers, Q-Tip of Tribe, Moni Love, and Queen Latifah. And that was featured on De La Soul's classic project, 3 Feet High and Rising. So the Native Tongues, they pretty much helped usher a distinct sound to the forefront of mainstream hip hop. You know, and that was opposite from the growing wave of gangster rap or any of the street energy that was bubbling around at that time. And what they did was they introduced and they further heightened a sense of abstraction and experimentation that wasn't really widespread in hip hop. Very socially conscious, very spiritual, often playful messages over unorthodox beat breaks and samples, and that basically became their distinct sound. Even to this day, some groups, some artists are heavily inspired by what was going on back then. Immediately what comes to mind is Beast Coast. You know, you think of that collective. Native Tongues was a very Afrocentric group. Very, very Afrocentric. And even with that, they still managed to break into the mainstream. You can even look at the catalog of all of the members in those respective groups. You know, you take De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising, A Tribe Called Quest, People's Instinctive Travels and Paths of Rhythm, Jungle Brothers, Done by the Forces of Nature, Queen Latifah's All Hail the Queen. All of these albums were released between 89 and 92, and they were all critical darlings. And it kind of encapsulates the golden age of hip hop. And rather than moving as one uniform, like one unit, they were more or less like a society of like-minded rappers, which made them kind of unique. You know, they would pick other members in the group to collaborate with at any given moment, and they were all close with each other, and they all could rely on each other whenever they needed a feature or whenever they needed production or whenever they needed something like that studio time, because some of the members owned studio space, or if they wanted to go on tour, things of that nature, which made them at that time, that would have been a very, in my humble opinion, a very dope collective to be a part of as a rapper coming up in the tri-state, in the New York or the tri-state area. But of course, with a group that big, there's bound to be, you know, a few problems, and there are tensions between several of the group's members. Leaders of the new school, which I brought up before, they actually ended up breaking up. Tribe Called Quest broke up in the late '90s. Some of one of the reasons was label issues that they actually had, and there was an issue. There was a little bit of friction between Pos of De La Soul and Q-Tip. However, they have a multitude of records together, like a lot of records together. There were so many different records that can be found on all of these artists' respective albums. So there's no shortage of music there. And for a more complete history of the native tongue, it was actually done by AV Club, and I'll actually post that in the show notes because it kind of does the group more justice than I personally could. I would definitely recommend checking out this article if you want to get more familiar with the native tongues. But like I said, the categorization, of native tongues being a society of like-minded rappers, I kind of feels that pretty much captures the essence of the group. All right, let's switch the plot. Let's fast forward to 93. Children of the Corners, another New York group, specifically Harlem, a very, very Harlem group. And it consisted of the late, great Big L, Killer Cam, who we know as Cameron today, Murder Mace, who just went on to become Mace, Bloodshed, who was Cameron's cousin, and Herb McGruff. So it was often said that Children of the Corn was founded by Big L, but according to a 2018 Jim Jones interview that was conducted by Complex, L kind of showed up later in the timeline, and the original group was Cam, Mace, Bloodshed, and a man by the name of Darrell Digger Branch. I'm guessing the attribution to Big L was probably due to him being the most successful of the group at that time in the early 90s, 92, 93-ish. So even looking at the genesis of the group, at the time they were all teenagers, which is crazy to me. Big L was 19, Cam was 17, Mace was 18, Herb McGruff was 18, Bloodshed was 17, and Digger was anywhere between 17 and 18. And of course, the name Children of the Corners, if you've recognized, Children of the Corners was taken from the 1984 Stephen King film, Children of the Corn. So let's go back to 92. So Big L, he made a name for himself as a witty freestyler, and he recorded several demos, and he was moving heavy in the underground circuit at that time, and he was able to get the attention of Lord Finesse, who co-founded the Bronx-based group Digging in the Crates. Fat Joe was also a member of this collective. So in February of 92, he appeared alongside Lord Finesse on Yo MTV Raps, and later was featured on a remix of Finesse's Yes You May, which appeared on the B-side of his more popular song Party Over Here. So then after that, L was added to Digging in the Crates, and Finesse would also go on to produce several tracks for Big L on his debut album Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, which was released in 1995. So still in 92, L signed to Columbia Records. And the year after that, Children of the Corn was founded. And like I mentioned before, as they took the name from the Stephen King film, this was at a time, and I guess rappers and people still do this now, but this is really at a time where like these rappers and rap groups were taking their names, or their names were inspired by pop culture. So you think of Wu-Tang Clan, think of MF Doom, the list goes on. So it's said that Dame Dash, of course, a very, very instrumental member in the Rockefeller Records movement. It said that he was the one to have managed the group, and what their marketing strategy, or what their business strategy was, they sold mixtapes out of their trunks. Selling mixtapes out of their trunks, that's what helped them gain recognition in that underground rap circuit. And they recorded and released over 30 songs, including American Dream and Harlem Nights. And over the years, the members, they saw individual successes. You know, L got his deal at Columbia Records in the early 90s. Mace signed with Bad Boy, as we all know, in 96. And it was through Mace that Cameron met Biggie Smalls, who then introduced him to Lance Un Rivera. Un was able to get him a joint deal at his own, and by him I mean Cameron. Un was able to get Cameron a joint deal at his Entertainment Records, but it was also with Epic Records. So it was basically his first major label, that he got signed to. Herb McGruff, he went on to sign on to Uptown Records in the late 90s, and of course, rest in peace to Andre Harrell. So what happened with the group? What happened to Children of the Corn? Unfortunately, tragedy struck the group in March of 97. Bloodshed, he passed away in a car accident at the age of 21. And that pretty much marked the end of Children of the Corn. Each of the members would continue solo careers, but as far as moving as a group, that was pretty much over. And almost 2 years after that, in February of 99, Big L was shot dead in Harlem. And the suspected killer was found not guilty due to lack of evidence. If I'm not mistaken, the case has gone unsolved. And, you know, it's unfortunate whenever you have a group and a loss of life. It's unfortunate whenever you have a loss of life, period. But specifically with Big L, he was regarded as a world-class MC, a great lyricist, and a great storyteller. And it would have been interesting to see how the group would have turned out had all of the members, had none of the members pass away tragically as they did. So remember the fifth member, so to speak, Digga. He actually went on to become a producer, and he produced a bunch of records, including a classic 50 Cent record, Many Men. He founded Six Figure Entertainment, and in 2003, he released Children of the Corn Collector's Edition. And that was basically a compilation of all of their records. I'm pretty sure that it was something that you can get physically. I'm not entirely sure if you can get it digitally, but as far as Children of the Corn songs that could even be played on streaming services, there aren't too many. There aren't too many right now. In addition to producing Many Men, Digga went on to executive produce Cameron's Confessions of Fire, as well as SDE. And of course, Cam and Mace, their relationship soured at the turn of the millennium in the early 2000s, and it was continued even into the last decade. So, like I said, unfortunately, we shouldn't be expecting any new Children of the Corn material or reunion anytime soon. So, once again, R.I.P. Bloodshed, R.I.P. Big L. They left behind a great legacy, and if you're one of those lucky enough to experience it at that time, or if you can dig, if you're good at digging through the internet, if you really want to familiarize yourself with this group, I definitely recommend them as somebody to check out for sure. All right, so even though the last two groups I went through were New York groups, I should switch it, but I think I think we're gonna be in New York for a while. So those of you listening in other states, just bear with this, please. So we'll switch it from Harlem to Brooklyn. As the saying goes, ain't no shook hands in Brooklyn. Yada, 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 yada. You already know what it is. So Crookland Dodgers. This is actually a Spike Lee joint, and you'll see what I mean in a second. The Crookland Dodgers, they're one of the more interesting groups on this list just because they're one of the only ones with 3 different iterations. So the first one, and perhaps the most well-known, comprised of 3 Brooklyn MCs, Buckshot, Master Ace, and Special Ed. And as I said, this was the brainchild of megastar director Spike Lee, who is a fixture not only in the Black community, but in the borough of Brooklyn as well. So in '94, he released the film Crookland, and that movie pays homage to the borough in an earlier era, in the late 70s. And what Spike wanted to do is he wanted the soundtrack to kind of reflect the values of the movie. And before I even go any further, Red Bull Music Academy, they did an oral history of the group by a gentleman by the name of Philip Mlynar. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So what Spike did was he gathered a bunch of Brooklyn MCs, including the aforementioned rappers that I brought up, as well as the late great Old Dirty Bastard, who's from Brooklyn, Q-Tip, even though he's from Queens, he still kind of represented that conscious rap, the socially conscious rap that Spike Lee was going for in the movie, and a few others. And what Spike wanted to do is he wanted to gather those MCs to create what Special Ed remembers Spike Lee calling a, quote, Brooklyn anthem. And during this process, he invited all of the rappers to a screening of the movie, an early screening of the movie, just to get an idea or a sense of the direction that they should go in with the record. As far as what happened during the screening, Q-Tip recalls, quote, "We was watching a movie and ODB got up after 10 minutes and was like, man, ain't nobody getting shot in this movie," and walked out. So that's ODB doing ODB shit, nothing new. Even though Spike gave them an idea of what he wanted to be captured in the song, he didn't really give them direction. He let the rappers and the producers really helm the project, and if there was any feedback or criticism or anything of that nature he wanted to give, he would do that after listening to what they brought to him. Now, Special Ed, he owned the Dollar Cab Lab recording studio in Flatbush, and that served as the group's home base. A bunch of MCs recorded there: Biggie Smalls, Tupac, Busta Rhymes, Boot Camp Click. Several people recorded in those walls during its 10-year existence. Rather than rappers sending it in, as Special Ed recalls it, those recording sessions were very collaborative. They were very group-inspired and group-led sessions. So when they came up with the original Crookland, of course, the song derived from the song inspired by the title of the movie, and Crookland Dodgers, the song being of the name of the group, being inspired by the movie. When they came with the first version of the Crookland song, it contained a typical rap braggadocio that you would expect from Brooklyn MCs in the 90s. And then that was when Spike kind of intervened a little bit and just explained to them the purpose of this song and what he wanted to go for when with the song Crookland. And this is per Philip M. when he describes the completed version, the one that was actually released to the masses. So he says, quote, Buckshot, Master Ace, and Special Ed dropped tight-knit complimentary verses on Crookland, but each rapper chose a different angle. Master Ace linked the past to the present via modernizing 70s TV show characters. Special Ed took a broader philosophical approach to musing on the life and times of a Brooklyn kid, while Buckshot packed his rhymes with hyper-local references to blocks he grew up on and the Franklin Avenue posse. Now, one thing that I remember about this group and watching the music video to Crookland, that was when I first found out that Michael Jordan and Mike Tyson were both born in Brooklyn. I don't know why it shocked me all those years. I saw it as a youngin', but still, I was like, damn, MJ and Mike Tyson, like the Mikes from Brooklyn. So, as far as the impact of the record, I guess this YouTube comment that I stumbled across, it pretty much captured it. The comment goes, and shout out to Dan S, no relation. The comment goes as follows. Quote, I'm virtually paralyzed by the intense feelings of nostalgia this elicits from my childhood. Born and raised in BK in the early 80s and still here, this is the music I grew up on in the 90s. Chairman Mao, the DJ, you can Google him, made a mixtape for me. Crookland was one of my favorite tracks on it. This was before Dumbo was overtaken by wealth, before the towers were gone, before Times Square was prostituted to giant corporations, before police were positioned on the Brooklyn Bridge, before anyone cared about Williamsburg. When the Double R train ran, when the original Pier 17 was there, when Brooklyn Bridge Park was just a bunch of warehouses, when the Williamsburg Savings Bank was still a bank and people didn't live in it, when the Beat Street Music Factory on Fulton Street competed for album signings, when music was non-disposable and you salivated for releases and didn't forget about what you listened to yesterday on iTunes or Spotify. I can go on and on. I'm not saying today is wrong. I guess I'm just getting old and longing for some of the way things used to be. And I'm pretty sure that was something Spike Lee was trying to capture with his film Crookland. You know, and it's dope that people can look back onto that record and feel that type of way about it. So as far as the group, Crookland was the only song that they ever made. Q-Tip said that there weren't plans to make a full-fledged group. Master Ace, he recalls getting approached by Spike to do a full Crookland Dodgers project. And he finagled the bagel at MCA Records, and which is now defunct and owned by Universal. And he secured a deal for the group to do a project produced almost entirely by Ali Shahi Muhammad and Q-Tip. Master Ace and Special Ed, they were down, but Buckshot politely declined, and because he was working extensively on developing Duck Down music, and that became a hub to several hip-hop players, including KRS-One, Boot Camp Click, Ninth Wonder, Be Real, and Sean Price. So, speaking on it, Buckshot said, speaking on their legacy specifically, he said, it's all good. We made history. History is about leaving your mark and leaving your presence. That's what it's about. We've made history and we put a scratch in the glass of time. So, like I said, that was it. That was the only song that they ever made. That iteration, at least. Fast forward a year later, Spike Lee once again releases the film Clockers, and Crookland Dodgers came together once again to produce a song for the soundtrack. This time, the group consisted of JRock, OC, and Jeru the Damager, and this was over DJ Premier production. Once again, that was it for the group. It's kind of a one-and-done situation with the second iteration. And finally, in 2007, Ninth Wonder, the producer Ninth Wonder, he put out a compilation project titled The Dream Merchant, Volume 2. And the single Brooklyn in My Mind appeared on that compilation. And it was presented by Crookland Dodgers. Once again, this time it was Mos Def, Memphis Bleak of Rockefeller Records fame, and Jean Grey, who was born in South Africa but was raised in Brooklyn. And it's crazy because some groups encapsulate the distinct sound of a generation, geographic location, or a subset of a culture. Crookland Dodgers, they embody the very soul of Brooklyn simply through one song. And that idea is continued over through different iterations, through different forms or evolutions of the group and several different songs. And that intention remained prevalent. So with this next group, once again, I'm staying with New York. You know what? For the rest of this episode, and I guess in addition to all of these groups belonging to the old vanguard, so like the early or the late 90s to, I want to say, the 2000s, early to mid 2000s, I feel like this group is just very New York, so to speak. Of course, with the exception of TDE. So it's another New York group that I got. And after looking at the rest of this list, it's safe to say that this group has the most star power of any of the groups that will be mentioned on this list or that I've already mentioned. Murder Inc. I'm not talking about the Ja Rule, Ashanti, Christina Milian, Lloyd Murder Inc. I'm not talking about them. But Murder Inc., they had the potential to be one of the greatest rap groups, possibly of all time. That's just my humble opinion. Anybody around for that era, I'm pretty sure they can attest to that as well. The Murder Inc. I'm referring to it includes Ja Rule, but then it's also DMX and Jay-Z. They formed at around 1995. And these three New York MCs, they came together and they marked the beginning of a gigantic run, the likes of which hip-hop hadn't seen at that point. And what I refer to is their dominance on the charts. We can look back and see how all three of those artists inspired a wave of musicians after then. But when we're talking about things like chart dominance, that's an easy way to gauge overall impact and influence, especially in the 90s when artists weren't really bundling albums with T-shirts and shit like that, and what, like, an album sale was clearly defined. You buy an album, that's one unit, as opposed to you stream a song 1,500 times, that's also one unit. So that's for all intents and purposes of this conversation, that's what I'm going to go with. So from 1998 onwards, each member would release a solo project that debuted at number one and would later receive multi-platinum RIAA certifications. DMX did this. He released 2 albums in 1 year. He released in 98, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood, and As Dark and Hell Is Hot, 2 very classic DMX albums. And I like this story a lot. This is one of my favorite stories as far as this list is concerned. And of course, Murder Inc. starts with none other than Irv Gotti himself. We're all familiar with Irv's relationship with Ja as he helped spearhead the Namesake record label in the early 2000s, and that allowed that label to become one of the most dominant, profitable imprints in urban music at that time. But there were also rumblings of the role that he played in the careers of both Darkman X and Hove. And those stories always surface from time to time. And that they all indicate that Irv Gotti played a very crucial role in the group's formation. As well as Irv himself, he said that he played a very vital support role in each of those artists in the earlier stages of their career, as far as their dealings with Def Jam or getting deals for both Ja and DMX and supporting the promotion for Hove's debut album. So in 2015, Irv went on a quasi tell-all tirade, whatever you want to call it, a very lengthy Instagram post, which he says was inspired by the 2000, I think it was 2015 biopic Straight Outta Compton. And then you remember, like a side note, right after Straight Out of Compton, everybody, especially in hip hop, wanted to do a biopic. And that was just like the next big thing. So many different biopics. And of course, each one of those stories they had its own value. But the biopic market just started to feel very claustrophobic after that, in my humble opinion. It's neither here nor there. But he went on this lengthy post delineating his and Murder Inc.'s rise to prominence. And he also talked about his relationships with all of the rappers in the group, like the dynamics of the role that just the role that he played. So right now I feel like this episode is gonna run a lot longer than normally. I'm just gonna take a real short break right now, and I'll be back in a little minute.